Hi there. We've got a Hachi Ni 8x2 kit ready to be assembled here with parts, and we're going to walk you through that assembly process. So we've got knob caps, some small parts, and potentiometers. We're going to set all that aside for a moment. Just get that out of the way and see what we've got here. So we've got the board stack here as it is all the parts. We've got a top plate, and then we've got the foam insert, the actual PCB itself, and the bottom plate. So let's set these aside. We're going to remove the foam insert here and just kind of set that aside, but kind of remember how it goes on, and it's pretty obvious where it goes. We'll put that over here. And looking at the PCB, we're just going to place the pots from the top, solder them on the bottom, and that's pretty much all we have to do. So let's get that going. So with each of these pots, it's probably a good idea to just give the legs just the tiniest little squeeze together, and that will help you snap them into the positions here. If you don't, they get a little tough to sort of get in there. So just give them a little bit of a squeeze, not much, just enough. And it might still be hard to sort of snap those guys in, but you don't want to be too loose because then they'll kind of flop around a little bit like that one is. But you could bend them out again if you want to. It's not super crucial because you're going to solder those lugs anyway, but it's nice for the assembly process that they don't fall out. You could also sort of get it in there and then push one of the legs with your thumb or something like I just did there. Not sure if that's coming through. You kind of give them a little squeeze from the outside, press it down. Missed one. Okay, all those are on there nice. So I think you can do from here is if you flip these over, it's going to kind of hold them all in place. You don't really need to do anything special there, but you know, if they're falling out, you want to make sure they're all kind of in place. What I do first on these is to solder one pin on each of the pots just to make sure it's sort of secure, and then we're going to give it a little adjustment just in case. So let's kind of get rolling with that. I'm just going to go through and solder the center pin, just a light tack for each position, and then come back and give it another little go in a second. So this is going to be super quick, just enough to hold it in place. Let's do these first. I'm not really worried about how these look just because I'm going to go over it again anyway. How to get that one? Let's do it again. Okay, all of those are tacked down now. So what we want to be sure of is look at it from the side like this, that each of these pots is nice and straight, or that they're sort of flat against the PCB where the mounting lugs are. So what I usually do with this is go through each one like this, and with my thumb and forefinger of this hand, press down on the bottom of the pot and sort of press on the top of the board while heating up one of these, the pin that I just sort of tacked in place, and kind of heat that guy up, get the solder wet, and then make sure it's nice and snug. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it is sort of a good way to make sure they're nice and flat before we do the rest of these. So I'm just going to kind of do that for the rest of these really quickly. And if they look flat, you probably could skip this step and just continue on. But when you put the panel on the top of these, you want these to be nice and straight and not rubbing against the panel. So this is kind of where this step gets to be a good idea. And sometimes you'll get to this step and be like, oh yeah, that one wasn't snapped on there very well. So like this guy is not on there very well. Give it a good snap. Or it wasn't flat by the looks of it. Let's see, is that on there? Sometimes you gotta look at it from the side. Yeah, it's doing alright. Alright, where the hell was I? This bunch. There's one that wasn't all the way down. And then give them just another little visual inspection, see if they look nice and flat. So we want to kind of go through and check them, make sure they look even. You could, at this stage, grab the top plate and make sure that everything kind of looks like they're nice and even. You'd have to like put the screw holes in, but yeah, when you center them, you look at it from the top to make sure they're kind of on there. That's a good way to double check and make sure things look nice. Good to do. Oh, I'm looking at it upside down. That's why I was looking at this. It didn't look like it lined up right. So LEDs over there. So that's kind of where, or the notch on the side with the notch on the side. That's kind of where this lines up. So anyway, if that looks nice and straight, those look pretty centered to me. So I think we're in good shape there. All right, let's solder the rest of these down, and we'll probably fast forward through this bit. This is the exciting part. This is the hard part. Just soldering all these pins. So we're just going to do them all. Do the two that I didn't do before, then do that center one again, just to heat it up. Check them all, make sure there's good solder on each one that's kind of flowed into place. I usually want to like hold this for like 2-3 seconds, make sure the solder flows, and then move it around. Sometimes you can kind of move the soldering iron back and forth to get both sides of the pin. You just want to make sure that it's on there, not too much, not too little. Make sure they're not bridged. That's all you're really looking for. Another quick soldering technique trick here. You kind of see this guy has got, let's see if I can get over here. This guy's got a little bit of sort of pad showing there. You don't necessarily need to have that all coated with solder, but it helps to verify that the pin is good. Let's see. You'll notice I have a very fine tip soldering iron tip here, and I want to get the sort of side of the iron against the pad and the pin at the same time. So you're trying to heat both of those and get the most sort of heat conduction, I guess, going between the iron and the pads. So you don't want to use just the tiny bit of the tip. You want to kind of get as much of that down there as possible. So I'm kind of going a little sideways with my iron to do that. If you've got a fatter, like a chisel tip or something like that, you'll get pretty good contact anyway. And then if you hit them again, just give it like a little, just an extra touch of solder. Get some flux in there. Make sure the solder is flowing. All right, let's just jam through these. Okay, so we've got those, all the pins for each of the pots good. You want to kind of give them a good visual inspection. Make sure the solder joints look nice. Could probably link to the Adafruit Guide to Excellent Soldering to see what those, little dome sort of shapes should look like. You don't have them too loaded up, and you don't want to have them too not loaded up. Again, you can double check that things look nice. Make sure these guys are kind of nice and snug, not sitting up all wonky or anything like that before we solder the lugs on. And that's the last thing, is just to go hit a little blob of solder on the bottom of these. You don't need to fill the hole for the lugs there. Unless you want to go crazy, you can, but you just want to get enough solder in there to keep it from kind of wobbling too much. So I'm just going to get through those again. What I tend to do here, I'll show you one of these in the middle, is get the iron kind of on the outside, feed a little solder in, and just get that joint, give it a little wiggle back and forth, and just get some solder on the outside of that. I don't know if that's super obvious there or not, but anyway, so you're just trying to, you don't need to load the whole thing up, but just enough on the outside to sort of get it secure so it's not going to snap out of place or anything like that. So that's all the soldering we need to do, and everything's kind of good to go. So next step is usually, depending on your flux, you're going to want to maybe clean up around the solder joints a little bit, and if you need to do that, sometimes Q-tip works well for that with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, which I have in a little bottle here. You want to just get a little bit on there, and you can kind of go around those joints with sort of the wet end, then the dry end, and kind of clean them up, clean up some of that flux. You don't really need to if you have no clean, because that's totally fine to leave on the board, and it actually acts as a little bit of a protectant apparently. But if you have a rosin flux, sometimes that's going to be a little more messy, and you want to give that a good little cleanup. So let's just jam through this part. And I'm just getting the big stuff up, and I'm going to kind of go over it once with a wipe at the end. And then when you look at this, you're going to see like some smearing and stuff, and maybe it looks worse than it did before. I don't know. But we're going to do another little cleanup at the end to sort of try to clean up those little smears and stuff. Because basically we're sort of smearing around the little flux residue that's on there. Also, the Q-tips will kind of get little puffballs stuck to the pins. That just kind of happens. Don't worry about it. Okay, so we've got a bunch of sort of residue left there, but let's do another little cleanup. I've got these are Kim wipes, which are laboratory sort of lint-free things. You could use a paper towel in a pinch as well. I mean, paper towel works just fine. But again, you want to get a little bit of isopropyl on that. You can just dab it from the bottle and then kind of just give the flat areas a good wipe with the wet part, and then with a little bit of the dry part, kind of go over it one more time. And hopefully this would get up the last of the flux. Usually what happens when you hit the pins, it's going to tear up the wipe a little less with the paper towel. But just want to kind of see if you can get up the sort of remaining bits of the residue, because we want this to look nice, because it will show through with the bottom plate being clear. And it's kind of nice to have it looking nice. So sometimes you got to hit that a couple of times, and then we'll do a last little brush or something to get rid of the fluff bits that got left behind. Sometimes I wonder, is this even a good idea to try to clean it up? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You could just leave the flux on there and it's fine. I think it looks a lot nicer if you can get it kind of cleaned up. Spot in between, like pots are always a pain because the pins are so sticking out there. So getting in between the lugs and the pot pins is kind of less than ideal. All right, so we got little bits of fuzz and stuff there. I use an old toothbrush just to kind of get off those last little bits of stuff, kind of see how it looks. It's looking a little nicer, a little less of the residue all the way around. You could hit that a couple more times with, like I said, paper towel. Let's see what a paper towel does different here. It's going to be a little lintier when you look at it, but no big deal. You don't want the alcohol to be super, super wet on there, too. You just want to get enough to give it something to kind of wipe up. Does that even make sense? Something to wipe up. Anyway, and you go over it again with it being a little dry bit. It's looking nicer. And then give it another little brush with it. Get those little paper bits unstuck. All right, I'm feeling pretty okay about that. I've got like a ton of fluff on our work surface here, so let's just, I'm just going to kind of scoot that out of the way with the PCB. And let's use a hand here. Even better, let's use our paper towel and give us like a proper little wipe up. That's still a mess, but a little better. Okay, so we're pretty much assembled, and if you wanted to get excited right now, you could test this by plugging it in and checking either the configurator online or just MIDI monitor or whatever and see if the pots do stuff. Should work. Should boot right up. You're going to get a rainbow cycle on the LEDs. And that's it. Something to keep in mind, power switch is this guy in the front right here. That may ship in the off position, so if nothing happens when you plug it in, you might check that the power switch is on, which is that direction. So our next step here is going to be assembly. So we want to, a couple things we got to do. So there's these built-in standoffs over here. So they've got a little piece of tape over the ends, so when they get soldered on, they don't fill up with solder. So you got to kind of pull those off. You can use some tweezers, like kind of stick a pointy tweezer in there and pull it off. And then sometimes you can get it to stick to your finger if you kind of get it from the side. But basically you just got to remove those guys. Whatever works for you. Sometimes they're just hard to get off. There we go. And then we're gonna get our parts again. So we need our spacer layer. Again, get rid of this. And you're gonna kind of see how everything lines up. You've got the microcontroller stuff is over here. That's this blank space, and then there's a space here for the battery that is optional. But these may have a little bend to them, but it is flexible, so just kind of work it into position. Get the center lined up, and when you push this on, the pots are going to be fairly snug, and then when these kind of go around, just make sure you don't sort of bust out the edges. It's fairly thin on the corners here with the standoff spots. So yeah, give that a good press down. Should fit fairly tightly around the pots. There's little cutouts on the underside for some of these parts, so you can kind of make sure this presses down really nicely all the way around. And if you're installing a battery, that's going to go here. And I'm going to find one just to show you which way it goes. Okay, we're back. So we've got this lithium-ion battery from Adafruit, which is the one we spec'd for this, and it fits in there fairly tightly, or somewhat snug. But anyway, if you take this out and take a look at it, it's going to fit in our little slot right there. So the main thing is we're going to have to take this little piece of tape off and get the plug kind of in the right place. So use a piece of tweezers or something just to pull that tape off, just to keep that from being like a little strain relief or something. I just take that tape and sort of reposition it over the end of that side. What the heck. Then here's where this gets a little fun, I guess. The battery connector right here goes in this direction, so if we're looking at it face up the right way, USB's on the right, the red lead goes to the right. So if you get a different battery and it happens to have the little slot sort of notch on the top and the red's on the other side, don't use that battery. That's the wrong battery. So we want to just sort of get that battery into the connector there. You could do this before you put the foam on. It might be easier, actually. You could use a pair of tweezers. Let's get the flat ones and sort of work that into position. Don't worry about where the battery goes yet. You want to get it connected first and then worry about that other part later. So we kind of got it in there. A little tricky to get it with the foam already in place. Maybe it's a better idea to do that beforehand, but we'll see. Hey, there we go. Okay, so you want to get in there, use a pair of tweezers or something to kind of snug that in there. Hey, look, power turned on. We got some rainbows. That's great. Okay, I'm going to switch that off for a second. So now that's plugged in. Where's this thing got to go? You probably want to, like when it's right here, sort of rotate it around so that wire is maybe kind of sticking out the top here a little bit. And you could flip it over, but find a way that it fits without it being pressing up too high. So you want that battery to be sort of inside the space there. So if that wire is sort of underneath, maybe that needs to rotate a little bit, and sort of walk it around that way. You could flip it over. Which way? No, not that way. This way. Yeah. I think what you want to do is to imagine we're here again, and just have that wire kind of coming out the top, and then snug it into place this way, so that these wires are sort of on the top and not directly underneath the battery. I think that works, because that's going to kind of get pressed down by the panel. All right, so our next step is put the panel on, put some screws on. So that goes on there. Let's find our small parts bag again. And in here we've got some rubber feet. We're going to come back to that. We've got our bamboo reset actuators here. These are for pressing the buttons that are inside these two little holes right here. So if you use the flat end, you can sort of press down these two buttons that are on the main board to reset it and to reprogram it if necessary. So when you have that together, you can sort of press those guys down. So keep those toothpicks around if you want. So from here, all we got to do is screw that together, and everything is cool. So we're going to come back to this in just a second. Okay, we're back. Found my screwdriver, and let's screw this thing together. What I suggest is just put the screws in. Don't tighten them down. Just put them in, screw them in a little bit until you're tightening it, and then maybe back it off a turn, because we're going to want to do a little last tightening adjustment at the end. You got 5 screw holes on both sides. We'll do the bottom plate here in a second. Okay, I've got those guys in there. Give them a little more turn, a couple more turns, and then back them off a notch. It's my exciting hand taking up the whole photo there. Okay, so we got the top in. We're going to flip that over. We've got to get our paper off of the acrylic bottom. You can do that beforehand if you want to prepare, but I like some sharp tweezers to get the paper to kind of come up. You don't want to scratch this stuff, but it's not going to be too obvious if you do. You could use a little knife or your fingernail to get under this corner. Sometimes a little tricky to pull up, but once you get it going, it's pretty straightforward just to pull that stuff off. And everything's going to line up with the holes on the bottom. So you've got the USB slot goes to this side, and you see where the pins have holes for them, so it should all line up and be nice and flat. So once we've got that, we're going to do the screws on this side. Again, tighten it a little bit, turn it back a notch, just to make sure everything's good when we want to get it nice and flat at the end. So here's where I'm going to leave a little slop there. So if the holes don't totally line up, you want to be able to move this around just a little bit. Just a little bit of play in where the holes are and where the inserts are, or the insets are over here. So let's loosen these guys up a little bit. And then everything's kind of loosely in place. Just kind of go through, make sure it feels kind of nice and snug all the way around. Make sure there's no gaps underneath here, that there's not something blocking the position. It does feel like it's not 100% flat there, but maybe that's just because I don't have it tightened down yet. If you've got really big solder blobs that don't fit in the holes on the acrylic, you may notice it doesn't fit totally flush. But so from here, if it looks like it's sort of in the right place, you can just kind of go through and start tightening these guys down. You don't want to tighten them super tight, just enough to where it's snug. They're not really going to fall out and go anywhere. I mean, I guess they could fall out if you're running around vibrating, making things move around much. We're going to do the other side. Make it snug. Get it one more time if you're excited about it. And that's kind of it for everything. So that should be nice and tight like that. And everything's cool. So last little bit would be, two things would be to put rubber feet on and put the knobs on. I'm not really going to worry about the knobs for the video here. I'm going to let you figure, well, maybe I'll show you a quick example to make sure you don't put them on too tight. So where the heck did the knobs go? So let's put the rubber feet on first. This is where my gloves might not be the best idea. I just kind of put these next to the screws, kind of stick them anywhere. They're little stick-on feet. They may come off over time. You can get some new ones. It's a 2mm thick rubber bumper. You can get them from Amazon. Or heck, I could send you some. Put some in the middle, put some on the ends. However you think 6 should go. And that's just enough to keep it from sliding around on the table. Alright, so done. So knobs, I just want to show you a couple of these, and maybe I'll fast forward through it real quick. I usually go through, make sure all the pots are turned to all the way to the left, and you'll see where the little pointer is on each one of these. And you want to kind of line up your dot with each one of those. I usually go through and just kind of set them in place first without pressing them on, and then we'll go through and do a little press afterwards. And you kind of line up the dot with the little line there. And make sure they all kind of look like they're in the right place or facing the right way. They might be off by a tiny little bit, but the next step is we're going to press them on, but not too hard, because if they're not in the right place, we don't want to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get them off. So if you press them on too hard, it can be very hard to remove. And you don't want to have to try to wedge these things or pry them off. So make sure they're in a good place. I just go through and give it like a finger press on each one, and you can kind of do this again if you want, but give it just like a light press, enough then you can just sort of pull it back off and give it another press. And I'm not pressing hard, just giving it enough to get it to stick in place, and we can look at from the side to see kind of how far they're on there in comparison to each other. Let's reset that one. So you look at it from the side. You don't want these to be all the way down. You want them to be sort of like this guy, where it's, you know, there's still a little black showing there underneath. You don't want it to be falling off, so if you flip it over, they don't fall off. You could just kind of flip it over and give it a tap and maybe a little press and see if they're on there. But what you don't want to do is press them all the way where that cap is into the hole of the panel, because that's going to get a little, it's going to rub against the shaft of the knob. So that's what you want to try to avoid. So there we have it. That's the whole thing built. I'm just flopping it around here, and that's all we got. So just be careful not to do the knobs not too hard. If you do, you can get like a plastic spudger tool, like one of these guys, for taking apart iPhones and stuff, and you can kind of get under there and kind of give it a little pry to try to work it up, or even like I think a keycap puller can kind of work for that, to sort of grab it on both sides to pull it up can help. And if you got it on there a little too hard. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're putting it together. In theory, the top plate should be removable with the pots on, but it might be sort of a wiggle, tough thing to get off. Haven't really tested that too much, but your mileage may vary trying to get those off. That's it. Thanks for watching.